Beneath the waves, U.S. Navy submarines in the Korean conflict. Seeing as the Korean War was a civil war, people tend to forget how important a role the U.S. Navy and its submarines played in helping South Korea stand its ground during the war. In this video, we'll be taking you through the lethal underwater crafts deployed by the U.S. Navy during the Korean conflict. Make sure you stick around so you don't miss out on anything. The Korean War started in 1950 and ended 3 years later when North Korea and South Korea were able to come to an armistice. For the most part of the war, a couple of other nations allied with both countries. North Korea was backed by the Soviet Union and China, while South Korea had the entire United Nations command, which was led by the United States behind them. However, as much as the US was involved in the war, you have to keep in mind that the Korean War was a civil war. The majority of the battles and attacks didn't exceed the Asian hemisphere, and as a result, the US Navy didn't have as much to do as they did during World War II, which ended just a few years earlier. So when it came to deploying submarines to get involved in the war, the Navy only ever needed two classes of battle submarines, namely the Trench-class submarines and the Vallejo-class submarines. Starting with the Tench-class submarines, of which only a handful were deployed during the Korean War. The United Navy initially launched construction on these vessels in 1944 during World War II. However, after 29 of the proposed 80 submarines in this class had been completed, construction was put on hold as the Navy realized more tenches wouldn't be needed to accomplish their primary purpose of defeating Japan. Little did they know that less than a decade later, the Navy would be requiring these boats to serve in the Korean War. By 1950, when the war broke out, the Tenches were the first set of submarines to be deployed to join the war. Before this time, though, the U.S. submarine force had launched the Guppy Initiative, which was a conversion program developed to give some of the Vallejo and Tench-class submarines similar capabilities to the German Type 21 U-boat. This was because after the war, recently designed submarines like the Tenches quickly became obsolete. They were designed to combat quick Japanese fleet boats during the war, an objective that had been achieved less than a year after the class was commissioned. In the years that followed, the Guppy program sought to make improvements to these submarines. The Guppy program sought to make improvements to make these submarines have larger battery capacity and better streamlining for maximum underwater speed, as these were the requirements to match the capabilities of enemy submarines post-World War II. A total of 16 Tench-class submarines were converted to one of the Guppy configurations, while 8 got the fleet snorkel modifications. Originally, the Tench-class submarines were designed to have 4 diesel engines driving electrical generators, 2 126-cell Sargo batteries, 2 low-speed directive drive electric motors, and 2 propellers. Their armament featured 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 28 torpedoes, 1 5-inch 25 caliber deck gun, and 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The original Tenches also had a top speed of 38 km per hour on the surface, 16 km per hour submerged, a range of 11,000 nautical miles, and a complement of 10 officers and 71 enlisted. By the Korean War, these submarines had undergone the Guppy conversion programs, and some of the major improvements included the replacement of 2 Sargo batteries with 4 more compact Guppy or Sargo II batteries, the removal of the auxiliary diesels, and the reutilization of below-deck space. Every Tench-class Guppy model submarine also had a snorkel, way more streamlined sail and bow, sonar, fire control, and electronic support measures upgrades. Their electric motor engines were also upgraded to the direct drive double armature type, which enabled the addition of modernized electrical and air conditioning systems. Virtually all the Tench-class submarines that served during the Korean War had the Guppy II modifications, which featured 3 new masts, snorkel induction, snorkel exhaust, and ESM mast. They also had the recently perfected snorkel design, and their high-speed drive motors were replaced with low-speed direct drive motors, producing 2,500 horsepower per shaft. One of these submarines was the USS Remora, which was already conducting anti-submarine warfare training exercises with units of naval forces far east in Yokosuka before the war began. As soon as the Korean War began, Remora was deployed to serve with the naval forces Japan, patrolling Soya Strait between Hokkaido and Sakhalin. She'd later returned to San Diego for overhaul before going back to the Western Pacific, where she served for the remainder of the war, patrolling the Okinawan waters. Another Tench-class submarine, the USS Valador, arrived in Yokosuka in 1951, where she carried out a number of special operations, like conducting undetected reconnaissance patrol in Japan to keep the Navy informed of China's seaborne and airborne activity. Valador also carried out anti-submarine warfare operations with U.S. Navy destroyers and is considered one of the most effective submarines to have served during the Korean War. Other subs in the Tench class that served in the war include USS Pomadon and USS Pickerel. By the end of the war, less than 10 Tench-class submarines were deployed for service, leaving the bulk of the underwater duties to the Baleo-class submarines. This might come as a surprise, seeing that the Baleo class are the predecessors of the Tench class. However, the major reason why so many Baleos were used in the Korean War is the fact that this class was, and still is, the largest class of submarines in the United States Navy, with 120 boats completed in this class. The original Baleo-class submarines were designed as an improvement on the early Ogato class during World War II. They were made to be significantly thicker, thanks to the use of new high-tensile steel alloy combined with an increased hull thickness, and have way higher yield strength steel in the pressure hull skins and frames than all the submarines made before them. These vessels had the diesel-electric engines, which was customary at the time, and incorporated the Fairwater design with a reduction in the conning tower and periscope shear sizes. Like the original Tench-class subs, vessels in the Baleo class also ran on 4 engines, had 2 Sargo batteries, 4 high-speed electric motors with reduction gears, and 2 shafts. They also had the same top speed, same range, and same endurance hours as the Tench-class submarines would have. The armament for these boats included 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 24 torpedoes, and 1 5-inch 25 caliber deck gun. During World War II, many of the Baleo-class submarines were deployed to serve in the Pacific, where there was hardly any use of a torpedo when the targets were sampans. As a result, lethal deck guns were important additions to these boats. Earlier models had 4-inch 50 caliber Mark 9 guns, which were later replaced with 5-inch 25 caliber Mark 17 guns. These guns were very much alike to the typical mounts seen on battleships and cruisers. Only the Mark 17s were built with corrosion-resistant materials and power-operated loading, without aiming features. Commonly used anti-aircraft guns like the single 40mm Bofors and twin 20mm Oerlikon mounts were also added later on. The Baleo-class submarines also had a design that allowed the substitution of mines for torpedoes, with the use of Mark 10 and Mark 12 type mines. This technology was introduced in the Tambor and Gato classes that preceded these subs and was maintained even when the Guppy conversions were made. For more efficiency though, the Mark 49 mine replaced the Mark 12s, and the larger Mark 28 mines were introduced with the constraint of only allowing 1 mine replacing 1 torpedo. By 1950, when the Korean War began, all surviving 101 Baleo-class submarines had been modified under the Guppy configuration. 13 of them had the Guppy 2 conversions. 9 had the Guppy 1A conversions, nearly 24 had the fleet snorkel upgrades, and the others fell into the Guppy 1B or Guppy 3 conversions. One of the only 2 subs in the Baleo class to be converted to transport submarines was the USS Perch, which received a War Patrol Combat Pin for carrying the British Royal Marines on a strike on a North Korean railroad in September 1950. Fun fact, Perch's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander R.D. Quinn, is the only submarine commanding officer to receive a combat award during the Korean conflict, despite the sub having just 1 patrol. Another Baleo-class submarine that served in the Korean War was the USS Blenny, which was converted in 1951 to the more cost-effective Guppy 1A model. Before the war, Blenny was either a midshipman cruise in Canada or Alaska. When the war broke out, however, she was deployed to Pearl Harbor, where she joined the fleet maneuvers off Hawaii. After her conversion, she was redeployed to serve across the Pacific for a cruise in the Far East, arriving in Yokosuka, Japan. While there, Blenny took part in many routine United States 7th Fleet operations, and made a 35-day reconnaissance war patrol off the Korean peninsula during the Korean War. Her sister submarine, USS Teru, saw a lot more action in the war despite also being returned to San Diego for a while to undergo an upgrade to the Guppy 2 model. Teru was fresh off conducting training and trials off the West Coast when the Korean War started. In June 1951, she sailed for the Far East and her first Western Pacific deployment, where she served as part of the United Nations forces. She also provided services for anti-submarine warfare exercises during the years during which the Korean War lasted. We also have to mention the USS Basugo, another Baleo-class submarine that took part in the war, both before and after getting fleet snorkel upgrades. Basugo left Pearl Harbor for Yokosuka in October 1959, and spent her first month in Japan training and being used in target services for U.S. anti-submarine warfare planes and warships. Eventually, in December 1950, she took up a patrol station off La Perouse Strait north of Hokkaido. During this period, Basugo bravely wandered through rough seas and a succession of snowstorms, as she made reconnaissance of Soviet ships moving between the Sea of Okhotsk and the Sea of Japan. She was also used to carrying out rescue operations, such as the rescue of 6 survivors of a PBM Mariner flying boat that had crashed in Nezuko on Omami Oshima after the installment of new sonar equipment and mine-clearing capability in 1951. Basugo returned to serve in the war. This time stationed at Subic Bay in the Philippines. She again conducted photographic reconnaissance of Hainan Island while submerged. Unfortunately, not only was the weather at her station terrible, her crew also had many disturbances from fishing sampans, resulting in her mission yielding very little results. The list of US submarines used in the Korean War won't be complete without mentioning yet another Vallejo-class submarine, one known as the Sea Devil. This submarine was one of the best in her class during the Second World War, having successfully completed 5 war patrols, including sinking Akikawa Maru and Hawaii Maru, and earning 5 battle stars. She continued to offer anti-submarine warfare training after the war until she was decommissioned in 1948. But just 2 months after the outbreak of hostilities in Korea, Sea Devil was ordered back into action, assigned to Subdiv 71, Subron 7, and based at Pearl Harbor. Given her stellar World War II experience in navigating Asian seas, it's no surprise she was recommissioned. Having only been used in Hawaiian waters for the early years of the war, Sea Devil was sent to the Western Pacific in September 1952. Serving from Yokosuka, she served TF-96, conducting ASW training exercises and maintaining preparedness for hunter-killer operations in support of the United Nations efforts until the end of the war. Other Vallejo-class submarines that served in the Korean War include USS Bugara, USS Carp, USS Char, USS Greenfish, USS Menhaden, USS Pomfret, USS Redfish, USS Scabberdash, and USS Segundo. Check out our channel for similarly exciting videos like this.